Welcome, everyone, to It Tastes Different Gaming Podcast, the podcast with four different flavors coming from four different gamers. I am your host, Patrick Smith, and I want to welcome my co hosts, Nick Irwin, Shane Eisterhold, and Russell Rowe.
Hey, Patrick, where can they find us?
Well, the first place you should check out is our website at ittastes.different.com. This is the place where you can subscribe to all of our streams and connect to all of our social media sites. You can also find us on Facebook at It Tastes Different. We're also on Instagram at It Tastes Different PC. And then last but not least is Twitter, where you can find us at It Tastes Diff. What's for dessert? We share the chocolate-covered bananas with sex and violence in video games. On this episode, we'll talk about the prevalence of both of those topics in video games, and how they basically started creeping into the video game market more and more. I would say violence is probably one of those things that has not. It's always been kind of in the video games, but probably the representation of it has just gotten a little bit more realistic and stuff like that. So where do we want to start this topic off, guys? We want to start with sex prevalence in video games or violence. Let's let Russ start this one off. Russ, which of those topics do you want to tackle first?
How did I know that my number would be called up on this one? I mean, first off, I've been gaming for a long time. 40 years-ish. I think I got my first Atari at 5, so somewhere around that many years. So I've seen the evolution and the everything that goes along with that. The violence portion of it, the violence portion has never really been too extreme for me. I think that if we have the violence in a fantasy world and if we take most recently we talk about Ghost a lot. Ghost is sort of like the realism, but the also fantasy version of it as well. It takes the realism of a samurai culture with the fantasy version of the ghost kind of within it, and slicing off heads and stuff like that. I mean, those things happened in war. I mean, those things happen in real life, and one of the reasons why we have an ETSB is for these reasons. I just think that the culture is kind of changing a little bit within that. And since I'm the one that has to pick a side first, we're going to go with violence first, and that's where I'll start. The violence portion of it is getting more in depth. It is getting more creative and visual. That's why we have those ratings of M for mature. They don't necessarily bother me too much unless it gets to be kind of like some of the Mortal Kombat. I'm sure there's a few people on this podcast that love Mortal Kombat and they love that. I'm not saying I dislike it. I just think that the over the top sometimes is a bit much, because inevitably 10-year-old gets a hold of that game and plays that game and sees it. And even though we may not think it affects them, we really don't. I don't believe we really know what those things do. But the violence for me personally as a gamer has never been that big of a deal. I've been able to handle it pretty well. I do like a good head chopping. I mean, that much I will say. It is. I mean, I think I've told you guys, I've told our audience, when you first learn of ghost form, the ghost form there in Ghost of Tsushima, you basically slice off a lieutenant's head, like right in front of his whole army, and it was one of the. I mean, I got chills down my back. It was just amazing. Of course, I love old samurai movies. Matter of fact, I've got like 3 or 4 of them queued for this holiday season, because by gosh, if it's the holidays, I'm going to watch a good samurai movie and Godfather. So that's pretty much it for me for right now. I think violence is getting a little rough. It's getting more visual, more visceral. But I mean, I think that's why we have the ratings. So, Shane, why don't you take it from here and have at it?
Pac-Man was an abomination, going around killing all those innocent little ghosts. Violence-wise, violence has always been, I think, an issue with games for a long time, and I don't know how much worse it's got, but it's definitely what pushes a lot of games to the sales that they get. Mature games sell more. That's just a fact. I mean, a mature game sells better because typically a mature game has a better story, not always not just attributed to the violence, but mature games typically have a better story, and that's fine. Violence in a game, I'm accustomed with. I mean, if you think about it, no matter how you look at it, violence has been around in pretty much almost every game. Look at Missile Command. You're shooting down missiles. If you miss, people die in little bunkers. Pac-Man, you're eating ghosts. Technically, they're dead, but it's still violence. And then you keep working your way up. Mortal Kombat. I mean, they had it, at a congressional meeting on that game because of the violence. And has it gotten any tamer? Oh, heck no. Now you can pretty much see all the tendons and everything when a head gets popped off. But it's also so overly dramatic and overly done that it's almost cartoonish. I don't see it as really violent. I see it as a freaking Saturday morning cartoon half the time. But that's what makes Mortal Kombat so fun. It is over the top. It's craziness. I don't think violent video games affect children as much as people want to say. It all depends on the kid. I think my son plays Mortal Kombat. My daughters play Mortal Kombat. They've never murdered anybody. But they're also raised in a way to know that it's bull crap. I mean, it's a fantasy world, those types of games. They're not out craving violent games. I mean, they'll sit and play Minecraft forever and a day. Not a big deal. But the violence and the overall, if it's not used in a context that's really befitting the story, the reasoning why you're being violent, then it's just dumb. And there's a lot of games that are just dumb. They're violent for violence sakes. Those are the games that typically become the problem. Manhunt, if you all remember that was an extremely controversial game. And it was a pretty crappy game. It was violence for the sake of violence. It had some neat premises to it, but it was just violence for the sake of it. That's why the game pretty much, sucked butt. I don't really concern myself about it too much. I think the sex and objectification of it's probably a little more my worries. What about you, Patrick? What do you think about violence?
I will say the one thing about violence is, it's existed forever. I mean, Manhunt was a big one. I remember back in the day getting like a lot of hate. I mean, it's a game about killing people. I mean, what more could you say? It's murdering people in various and horrific ways. It's a Rockstar game. Rockstar always causes controversy.
Yeah.
So I mean, their games have always been on a list of controversial titles because of stuff that's in their game. But I mean, games like Manhunt are nothing but you killing people. And think of things like Postal, where it's just you're going around Postal, you're killing people. I mean, what do stuff like that has been around for a long time. It just gets kind of weird when you see, I don't know how, certain video games. Was it Medal of Honor? No, it wasn't Medal of Honor. It was Call of Duty. Which Call of Duty was it that had you do the killing all the civilians?
Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah, I remember that one. That was about
going through the airport.
Yeah, and you basically, I think it was an optional mission too, but basically had you mowing down people in an airport, just, so I mean, there is tons of that stuff. And I don't actually think two thoughts about it for the most part. I mean, for stuff I play, it just seems pretty normal. I'll play something if it's entertaining me. And Mortal Kombat, just like Russ had mentioned Mortal Kombat earlier, that game is known for its violent ways to kill people, the different finishing moves and stuff like that, ripping out spines, crushing skulls, all these different ways of killing people and controversial ways of killing people, decapitation and ripping off their junk and stuff like that, You leave it to Mortal Kombat to kind of make unique ways to kill people, I don't know. I don't honestly think violence is a big problem in video games to the most part, because like Russ had said, and you have said, there's ratings meant to keep those away from minds that are too malleable for that. But at what point does it become too much? I don't know if there is a point where it's too much. I mean, I guess I didn't play a lot of Manhunt because it wasn't fun. I will admit I played it. It wasn't fun for me. Um, the same kind of stuff with Postal. I played Postal and Postal 2, and they were okay, but they didn't hold my attention. Now games that let you needlessly and mindlessly kill people are like the Grand Theft Autos and stuff. Whenever you play those games, they allow you to just kill civilians. There's missions to just kill as many people as you can in a short amount of time and stuff like that. So I don't think that those are big, huge. Violence is a big, huge thing because it is somewhat locked behind a rating wall. But I don't know. We often see a lot of videos online of ill-behaving kids, and I don't necessarily believe video games are the reasoning behind it. I think parenting is the reason behind that. So I wouldn't go as far to say violence in video games is a trigger for kids or anything like that. I mean, if you're a parent who lets your 7-year-old play, Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that, then that's probably part of the problem if your kid's not mature enough for it. Now, everybody knows their kid better than anybody else. So if you think your kid can handle it, that's fine. But if your kid's one of those ones that they see throwing a tantrum in the store because they don't get their way and using violence on other people to get their things done, then obviously they're learning that from somewhere. Yep. So I don't necessarily think of violence in video game as a deterrent in buying it or even anything else. I mean, video games have always been violent that I can remember. I cannot think of. I mean, I remember playing games back in the day on the old DOS shell. I think I can't remember what it was, but it was like a Doom-esque game. But Doom was original DOS. It was on a DOS shell as well back in the day. But it was all blowing people up and shooting their heads off and blood and stuff going everywhere. So, I mean, violence in video games has been there. The only difference is now the graphics has gotten better. And as you said, you can see the muscle and the sinew and the bones and brain matter and all that kind of stuff now. So, I mean, it's getting a little bit more realistic. But for the most part, I think a lot of us are desensitized to it because I don't realize it in the video games half the time anymore. That I honestly, half the time I forget there's even blood in video games sometimes. Like, oh, yeah, look, there's blood, So, Nick, what do you think about violence in video games?
I think the whole thing has gotten desensitized, kind of like what you said. You think about violence in general, right? Not just video games, but just in general. And it has broadened throughout the years. You think about news and you think about other things, movies and things like that have come out throughout the years, and violence is always in those things. And I think for us growing up, and for newer kids, even PG-13 movies have violence, and even some violence that you would think that would be a little over the top, but it's still PG-13. So I think as a community, as a society in general, not just us older individuals or younger or anything like that, but just everyone, however you put it, just everyone overall has come desensitized to violence, where violence doesn't bother us. You look at the news every night and there's some sort of violent something going on, a shooting in your area or, someone did something. They don't show what happened, but they pretty much talk about it and pretty much describe it to the point where, these things can be pretty detriment to someone who's not used to them. So the point is for me, violence is not a big deal, especially in video games. And we've become so desensitized to that aspect of a thing is violence, where even if we read news reports or we see a game that has violence or a movie or anything like that, we don't think anything different. We don't think differently than we would normally with it. We just see those and we go, okay, that's just a normal part of life, and we move on, So I think it's that. I think it's that aspect of just the decentralization of those things, where we're just so used to them that it doesn't bother us that much, right? It doesn't matter how gory Mortal Kombat can get or how gory a game can be. to us, or a movie or a TV show or anything like that, it's always the same, right? Our feelings are always the same, right? Unless someone's being tortured, maybe, where we might feel something deep inside, where we feel like remorse for that person. Otherwise, we don't care, right? It's a pretty bad way of looking at things, but we don't care because it's just the kind of way that we grew up. Now, that's my way of violence, or my thought of violence is that, it's here, it's there. We're kind of used to it. We're kind of used to seeing it, and it doesn't affect us in any which way, unless it's something that's probably happening to us or to someone that we know, right? That maybe we have a different opinion of it. But seeing it on the screen or seeing it in movies or games or anything like that, we have the same effect as our kids are going to have, because we don't have an effect to it and they're not going to have an effect to it either. So it doesn't matter how grotesque or anything like that, how outrageous it may get. We're all pretty much desensitized to the fact that violence is violence, and that's just the way it is. So, then we go on to, I think the bigger subject is sex.
Well, I was going to say, on the violence thing, though, I mean, it's a different thing when you see it in a video game or on a movie or a TV show, because those aren't real, and I think most people, and us, and kids in general, can understand that at some point. I mean, because I've had the conversation with my child about, this stuff's not real. When she's playing a video game or something that's kind of scary or creepy or even a little violent, I'm like, this isn't real. And when we watch a show, but I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if I see something on television or something that I know is true, I get a cringy type thing when it's violence to that extent. Like I've seen on the internet, we've seen plenty of stuff that just makes you gasp or go, oh, that's bad or whatever, But if I saw the same thing in a video game or a movie, I wouldn't think that, an example would be, I remember when I was younger and I grew up in Florida where they had a pretty good gang problem, and there was Sir 13, Sir Today Say was big when I was a kid down there. And I remember seeing a kid get curb stomped, and literally curb stomped. And it was like one of those, holy crap, what did I just witness? It was like the most, kid got up, his jaw's like hanging, his teeth are, it was bad. And then if I see stuff like that now today, it still affects me. But if I were to see the same thing in a video game, where you curb stomp somebody in a video game, doesn't have that effect. But real life still tends to have an effect on me to where I'm like, ooh, that's bad, or a gasp or something. I don't know about you guys, but to me, I still have that reaction to real life events. Like when you see something, in this day and age, the biggest thing we have to deal with is cowardly terrorist people who chop people's heads off. When you see something like that, that affects me. I'm like, oh God, that's horrible to see something like that,
Yeah,
but
I don't know. Real life experiences would definitely, I could see a real life experience definitely giving you a different outcome on things like that, right?
Well, it's because we know the difference between reality and entertainment. I'll be honest, my biggest issue with violence isn't video games or movies, it's the news. I think the news needs more of a filter, more of a rating system than any video game or movie does. I think the news shows the realities of it, and I think that's why you get all these goddamn school shooters. They end up glorifying what they're preaching against, in my opinion, and I think that's detrimental, very detrimental. I mean, look at half of these kids that do these shootings. I mean, they've researched and glorified these other shooters, and they're just, they're mimicking.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think violence in real life has my body or brain or whatever you want to say, my brain compartmentalizes it to the point to where it knows what's real and fake, and a real life situation that I could see in a video game would definitely garner a reaction out of me. I mean, I can't stand to see violence in real life anyway. Like, I wouldn't want to sit there and watch somebody get the living crap beat out of them and just, I don't care. It's just one of those things where I couldn't sit there and watch something like that.
or anything like that, or somebody to get seriously maimed. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where when I was younger, I was in Police Explorers, and you saw all kinds of horrible stuff, and you feel for people like that. But you would see the same thing in video games, like in Postal and stuff like that. You could go out and this is an older game when we were kids and stuff like that, and they would shoot Santa and stuff like that. But I remember being a kid in Police Explorers, and when I would say kid, I was probably 12, maybe 13. And I remember a drunk driver when I was in. If you don't know what Police Explorers is, it's like when you're a kid, you can do these things to be like career exploration. And so Police Explorers was one of those things where you got to do right along with police. Parents signed a waiver, you went with them and you did stuff with them and learned what they did and all this stuff. And I was working with a cop that worked a Christmas parade where a drunk driver had plowed through the Christmas parade and had killed Santa. And I was like mortified as a kid. And I still thinking about that. It kind of gives me this weird heebie feeling of like, oh, you know, it just. But in a video game, it's like, oh, that's funny. Or, you know, if they do something on like South Park or Futurama where Santa Claus is a killer robot and they kill him, you know, it's all funny and fun and games because it's not real. But the reality stuff still affects me because I think I'm desensitized to it in video games and movies, but not in real life, I would say.
Yeah, but I think it's because your brain knows real life compared to, you know, a video game has not close enough to reality. As far as graphics, none of the characters still look real. As far as it's changed, it's still, you know, it's fake. I don't know. I think the violence.
I mean, I think I slightly disagree with you, Shane, a little bit in the reality of it. Last of Us 2, the stealth kills were, I mean, I'm not going to say that they were like exactly what it might look like in real life, but they were pretty violent. We talked about like sound and atmosphere and everything making it. You could hear the guy gurgling. You could hear Ellie, you know, jabbing the knife. You know, you could hear that whole thing. So, I mean, even though it's not realistic, it's still pretty darn. I mean, it's as close as you can get without having the real thing. But I mean, I'm just kind of disagreeing with you on the essence of that. I mean, hopefully most people, and if you are, you know, a decent parent, you're going to teach and learn your child on the fantasy world versus the reality world, of course. But I wouldn't say that in the next generation, it's getting more visually accurate than it was whenever we were playing, you know, I don't know, the Super Nintendo. So, you know, it's just that that's just where I would, you know,
I think it's getting more visually accurate, and I would agree with you that. But I don't agree with the fact that if you were to take a kid, let's say, and have them play Mortal Kombat and then go out and slice a dude's neck, that they would have the same reaction in Mortal Kombat as they would in that, right? I think the mind in itself, the brain in itself knows, even if you don't tell the child that this is a unrealistic thing, right? Because it looks unrealistic, right? It doesn't look, you know, the characters fighting on screen. Let's take Mortal Kombat as an example. The characters fighting on screen don't look real, right? They don't look like you or me or anybody else. Yet they try to make them look as realistic as possible, but you can still tell that these are cartoonish characters, right? And I do double quotes in that. Cartoonish characters. So, and this is a hypothetical, right? So, if you were to show in Mortal Kombat someone slicing someone's throat, the kid, you know, and this would have to be something that would have to be researched, but I would think a kid would say that and go, you know, have a certain reaction. Whereas if that happened in real life, they would have a completely different reaction. I just think that in most typical kids, that would be the case, right? In most typical people, that would be the case. Like Patrick said, you know, you could play all these games and stuff like that, but if you really experience these things happening, that is a completely different aspect of your brain, I think, in experiencing those aspects of life where something like that happens and your body and your mind take a different perspective on what's going on, where these are made up characters in a made up universe, versus real people in a real life universe or scenario where you live in and you're experiencing. So I think, I would chalk it up to the human brain to say the human brain would be like, oh, okay, I know what's going on here. This is bad and this is good. You have those, yes, you do have those individuals in life, serial killers, mass murderers, things like that can't visualize or can't separate fact from fiction. But I think in general, most people can. Regardless of how they're raised, right? I mean, some are raised better than others, but I think most people have that general good and bad type of thing. I don't want to necessarily place it as good and bad, but you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like the subconscious and conscious type of thinking where they know, okay, this is a good thing, or this is okay, whereas this is not good, this is bad.
Well, I don't think any of us are psychologists, sociologists, neurology. I don't think any of us are that. And I think a common sense, I think, speaks to us all in saying, if you have a what we call a privileged life, I guess you want to say, if you have a privileged life where you have good parents, you have a good household, you can easily distinguish those two things. Whereas I would never be able to say with certainty that, say, somebody that's playing a game that is like a rock star, that's like Grand Theft Auto game, and then is at home where a parent is abusive or something like that, how that may or may not affect them. I'm not even remotely going to say whether that is or isn't. And that I think I'm kind of going off topic of it just a little bit, but in saying that the violence in the games has advanced to the point where it's becoming more visually realistic than in previous years. And I don't know if that's going to get us in trouble or not, but for me as a year-old gamer, I'm glad that I get to chop off Lieutenant's head in front of the whole army, because now I'm going to go ghost mode and even chop people up more.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, none of us, like you said, are that. And it's one of those things where I think that if you do have something wrong with you mentally, a video game, playing it or not playing it, is not going to affect any. I mean, it's going to affect you differently than a normal person who's, whatever definition of normal is in brain makeup. If you have a normal life and you have normal brain makeup, I don't think playing a violent video game is going to cause you to go out and kill a bunch of people. Because, I mean, you see it in everyday life where you have rich, privileged kids who go out and run people over and think it's okay to hide it. And then, they get away with it or they don't. And it's, it seems like their family life's okay. We don't know any of that stuff. I honestly think that just some people are wired differently and different things affect them differently. And so violence in video games is one of those things where if you're a parent with a kid who plays video games, you just need to be aware of what they're playing and if they think that they can mentally handle what they're playing and seeing. So I don't honestly see violence in video games as a big a deal. I mean, agreed. It's not like they're going out, and when we're talking about violence, because violence can be multiple things. I mean, I guess to some extent you can go the other way with violence because you have violence and sex combined. Where we're going to talk about sex in video games as well, but at what point is it too much? Like, there's video games where there is sex and violence combined. And what I mean is like forced sexual encounters or forcing whatever, I mean, think of Grand Theft Auto where you pay a prostitute to have sex with you. And then they get out of the car and you run them over with the car, or you beat them up and kill them and take your money back. I mean, there's a combination of the two. Maybe that has more of an effect on younger people than just one or the other, because I'm not going to go out in my life and get a prostitute and then beat her over the head with a baseball bat and get my money back and just think like that's okay.
No, you'll use a check.
Right. I'll use a check, and yeah, then I'll stop payment on the check.
Cancel it.
You know,
But no,
Those
it's
are things
seriously,
that are-
it's serious.
there's things
though.
in my
You're
life I'm not
absolutely
going
right.
to do. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go out and do that. And then we talk about a game. I've mentioned this game many times before, but what about? Did you guys, Nick? I think you played Phantasmagoria, right?
Oh yeah, back in
The
the
point
day.
and click. That game is an older game, but it had a rape scene in it where you raped the woman. You know, that game I played when I was super young. You know what it didn't do? It didn't make me go out and rape women or beat women or make me objectify them or anything different than not playing the game would have been. I was like, wow. When I play, I'm like, that's insane that just happened in a point and click adventure video game. You know, it's not like they showed anything, but you know, it's still.
I think these
Yeah.
things stem from, I think people going out and doing these particular things, I think mostly, not 100%, but mostly stem from what you said, Patrick, how they're wired, right? Whereas most people, we play Phasmagoria, or we play Sewer Shark, or we play, what's that one?
Night Trap.
Night Trap, right? And we don't think twice about the things that are going on, right? I mean, oh yeah, hey, but we don't, beyond that, it doesn't extend beyond that, right? Whereas, especially even going with violence, going with violence in Mortal Kombat and stuff, like Shane said, they had the Congress had the whole thing. I remember all that stuff with Mortal Kombat 2 and all that crap that went on with Mortal Kombat and all the Congress meetings and everything. I remember all that stuff. And, and I don't think those people and those kids, I played Mortal Kombat. I loved Mortal Kombat when I was a kid. But it didn't make me go out and want to uppercut my friend, right? So, I think it's just the way that people are hardwired and the way that people are mentally there that really affects what they are going to do based on these things, right? I think personally, in my personal perspective, I think these people that are that way, we're going to do this regardless, right? Regardless of played Grand Theft Auto, regardless of played Mortal Kombat or watched, some movie like, what's that one, that alien movie? I can't remember, with the showgirl or whatever. But anyway, where she was an alien. What was it?
Like Species or whatever?
Yeah,
Like
Species.
Oh,
That was the
gotcha.
big. Remember that? That was the whole thing back in the day, the Species movie, and or Showgirls. Remember that movie? That was the whole thing back in the day. So, movies like that. I don't think these people watch these particular movies or play these particular games and go, "Oh, I want to do that." I think they were already in the mindset for these individuals to do something like that. So whether or not they played them or watched them or read them, or it doesn't matter, they were going to do this anyway, right? Maybe those things were a catalyst to get them to bump them further in, where they're like, oh, okay, now I have my mindset to do this, that, or the other. But regardless, it didn't. The main thing is it didn't take much, right? It didn't take much to convince them to do whatever heinous crime they were going to do, as far as something like that goes, right? They were already going to do it to begin with, but maybe something they saw or something they read or something they played pushed them to that point where they were going to do it. So it doesn't matter what it was, be it video games, movies, or books, or whatever, or even the news, they were going to do it anyway. And they just used whatever they saw, or whatever they read, whatever they watched as a catalyst to say, this is what pushed me over that edge. But they were going to go over that edge regardless. They were on a whitewater, they were heading towards the waterfall. It's just something pushed them along the way. Maybe something pushed them a little further, but they were heading towards that waterfall regardless.
Yeah, and you have to remember a lot of the issues are over dramatized by these so-called leaders that we have. That basically they want excuses. They want to give reasonings where reason is not. The kid who did the shooting in the Colorado theater for Batman wearing the Joker makeup. These bureaucrats. First thing they wanted to do was blame movies, blame video games. No, you retards. That's not the reasoning for it. He's just a sick person. Sometimes there is no reasoning, but people need to have some sort of answer, even if it's the
100%
wrong answer.
Train. 100% agree with that. They need something to latch on to.
Yep.
Whether it didn't matter, that kid that went in there, like you said, that during the Batman movie and wore the Joker makeup and shot everybody up, was he gonna? If Batman ever came out, would he have done it? Probably. It didn't matter, right? It didn't matter what movie it was. He would have.
He would have done that in Pokemon.
Right. He would have found something to do what he was going to do because he already had it in his mind to do it. It's just that was just for him, just like, hey, this is perfect opportunity, right? He just found something to do what he was already planning to do, right? So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that it's Batman or Superman or Mortal Kombat or anything. It doesn't really matter. Violence is violence. People are going to commit violence because they want to, not because something makes them. No one makes anybody do something they don't want to do. Unless they're brainwashed or something like that, these people are wired to make choices in their life that, it may come from a lot of different things, right? There's no one source for this type of thing, right? There's no one source. You can't just go out and blame Mortal Kombat or blame, GoldenEye 007 movie or blame Batman or blame the news, right? It's a mixture of different things that cause someone to do something bad to that extent, right? It's not just one thing.
No, definitely. It's we as a society, we have got to stop garbage like that because it does nothing but hurt us. We end up attacking the wrong things and causing more problems in the long run. But like you guys said, it's people. That's it. I mean, people have an inherent good in them. I believe. I don't believe good is taught. I believe good is inherited. I think wrong and evil and racism and hate is taught. I don't believe people are naturally that way, but there are those that they have a crossed wire and they need help. But you don't have to blame everything and everybody else, to make yourself feel better.
All right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, we're not psychologists, sociologists, or anything like that, because there's all kinds of theories on nature versus nurture and all that kind of weird stuff on what wires people's brains at a certain age. So I mean, it's all hypothetical on that stuff. But I do think for the most part that video games don't affect the majority of people. But there are people out there, as we've said, who are wired differently, and video games just affect them differently. I mean, I don't know. If video games affect people in that way, then you might as well say movies and music do, because the only difference between, especially movies, there's no difference besides that you're controlling the character doing the action. And then, even when you think about like books, you have choose your own adventures and stuff like that, where you're in control of what the character does. And there's been smut books around forever and romance novels. And then you have music, which, music is just, I want to do you this way and do you that way and pull your hair and yell in your ear and whisper in your ear and just do bad things to you. I mean, it's surrounded by everything in life. And I don't know. I mean, I do believe people are wired differently is the way this stuff affects them, because we all kind of grew up in the same thing. I mean, when I was a kid, my parents only censored me from gratuitous sex. And from movies, we watched everything. We were allowed, if there was a little nip slip scene or, somebody's got full frontal nudity for a second, it was like, whatever, but gratuitous sex, my parents were like, no, you just don't need to see that at your young age. Yeah. But we watched everything else. We watched violence and gory stuff as kids. And, it was one of those weird things, but so I don't agree with the violence. I mean, violence is obviously just getting more realistic and everything. So
I really think that in the long run, I'm sorry to cut you off there, Shane, but I think in the long run, what we look at is that really, as a society, as a culture, we have a mental health issue And when the mental health issues come up, they think, well, we need to censor this, this, and this so that we can protect everybody's mental health. No, we need to improve our understanding and help with the symptoms of mental health more. We need to spend more money helping those people than we need to censor things. And that my biggest issue. And you know what? Before I start, I want to let Shane, because that was my point to what Patrick was saying, or what we all were saying, was mental health really is the issue, not video games. So let's treat the mental health, not turn off all, not super censor. You have super censorship on those things. That's one thing I'm definitely, personally, I don't want to censor anything, because it's people's right to put whatever out there. It's my right not to watch it. It's my right not to listen to it. It's my right, but we shouldn't have that censorship there.
Right.
Yeah,
But if you're Congress, what are you going to do? Congress and them failed statistics in economics and all that stuff. They forgot that correlation doesn't prove causation. And they're just like, hey, these guys all played video games. They also didn't take into account they all listen to the same music, watch the same movies, or any of that stuff. They just pick a singular focus, and they say we want to rein in video games. So we're just gonna say we're gonna throw statistics and logic out the window and say correlation proves causation here.
Well, it's it's the same talk about video games and movies as it is about guns. Guns don't make you kill people. Something's got to be freaking wrong with you to want to, kill and hurt other people. And like you were saying, Russ, you cannot sit and blame everything else when society is the one who's failing. When you blame a video game, you blame a movie, you blame a gun, you're just hiding the reality. The reality is if you want to trust Congress to fix a problem, well, then you've got probably more issues than somebody who shoots people, because they ain't fixing crap. They ain't done so, and for God knows how long, and ain't never will. We need to just put more thought into these situations instead of just immediately throwing a generic answer at it. What made him kill? Oh, well, that was a video game. Or what made them shoot people? They were protesting. It's bullcrap. Just get with the reality of it. And then, then maybe we can come up with answers.
Right.
So,
like you said, it's all mental health.
So kind of turning the page within this, what I wanted to add to the second point of what I was saying was, like, I think what bothers me the most, whether it be violence or sex, and usually it's more sex or sexuality that gets in the way for me than anything, is that when it deters from the story, when it deters from the gameplay, when it does that, I think that's where it bothers me. And my examples are, I'll start with a show first. I'll start with the show Sense8. I don't know if the crew here have watched
Netflix, right?
Netflix show, yes. Sense8, I almost did not watch that show. Within the first 3 scenes, there were over-the-top sexuality things that were just... I don't care if that's how people want to live their life. It doesn't matter to me. I wanted to know what the story was about, and I almost gave up to the story, because the story for that show, to me, is actually very good. It's a very good fantasy sci-fi type of storyline. We're talking about 8 people that are connected telepathically and this, that, and the other. But I almost turned that show off because of the first 23 minutes of that show. And of course, they have terminologies for shows like this now where, they're baiting people into watching these shows and doing that. For some people, Game of Thrones was a trouble because there were so many gratuitous sex scenes in that first season. For some people, it was an issue. But the story of Game of Thrones is magnificent. Talk about sex and violence. That's the whole show. But now going to the gameplay side of it, that's why I struggled with Cyberpunk. Because sex was a currency in this game. It was everywhere. I'm not saying I'm not a red-blooded man. I'm just saying I want some story. I want more to it. I want more depth to these things. It's why I love Yakuza so much, because I think before we started this podcast, me and Nick were bantering about the fact that it goes to that line, but it always brings it back. The story always brings it back, and it's hilarious, and then it brings it back to kind of a center, and it toes a perfect line within that. And so that's for me where I start to have trouble with these two subjects, sexuality, sex, and sex and violence, basically, is that when it detracts from a storyline.
Yeah. Sex in a game is just like the violence. It doesn't matter how funny or goofy or fun or real or whatever your violence is, unless there's a decent context for it. I mean, you got to have reasoning for it. And the reasoning can't be, and I agree with Russ. I think the whole sex for currency thing is just, it's too much. And I'm generally, I don't even give two craps about that stuff, but even I will sit and go, yeah, that's just too much. I mean, it doesn't make sense for even the game to have it, but it's there. Why? I can't grasp the reason for it. Now, what was the first game you guys remember seeing boob in?
I really don't honestly know.
Leisure Suit Larry.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. What about you, Russ?
I never played Leisure Suit Larry. I'm trying to think like which game was the first game. I want to say it was like, wasn't it like one of the first Witchers or something like that had like side boob in it or something like that?
Every Witcher has full frontals.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it had to have been like something like that. I mean, but I was well in my, golly, I mean, I was well in like
Yeah, that'd have been your
20s.
30s.
For me, it was probably Duke Nukem 3D, because you could do that trick where you could play you could pay the strippers money and they would.
Maybe you're right.
Oh man, I forgot. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw even some of that before, because I remember playing the original. What was the name? What's the game? Shadow whatever, where you're playing as Wang. Shadow Warrior. Yeah.
Shadow Warrior,
the original Shadow Warrior had the hidden waterfall with the chicks naked bathing.
Yep, and see, I'm kind of surprised you guys named off games I didn't even think about. The Shadow Warrior, especially. My first boobin game that I honestly comes back to my brain is freaking God of War. And how old is that game? The original. That was a mini game, and there was a boob in it.
I don't remember there being boobs in the original. I remember in the second one there was.
Yeah. I now that I think about it, I think there was in the first God of War. I didn't play much of it, but I think I remember hearing something about that. It's like,
yeah, and I'm not gonna lie. At that age, I want to see that. Sure, that was a pixelated hooter, but I'm a guy. I mean, I like girls. I'm gonna look at a pixelated boob. I mean, my parents had a filter thing on the dirty movie channels. I've seen porno with that filtering.
Were you thinking, is that an elbow or a boob?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all scribbled, and you're like, yeah, I can make it out.
I mean,
exactly.
What was it? Sexuality in a game? I guess you want to say, like, I mean, the old Tomb Raider game. I mean, that was like everybody. I mean, yeah, they were triangularly square boobs, but I mean, everybody was like, crazy for that one.
And how many fan art pictures and fan art stories were showing her, completely in her nudity and.
Well, yeah, there was always that.
But that's outside of there.
But the point is, though, that sexuality led to that. Now, granted, there was never a boob shown in the Tomb Raider game, but the guys are built that way. We're just guys like boobs.
I mean,
and that's the way it started, though. But where it's leading to is the issue.
I mean, there's always been, to some extent, especially in storytelling video games, there's always the sex scenes. I mean, you think about all of the great storytelling video games. have nudity and sex in it. When you think of any BioWare game, there's the relationship stuff. So there's always some type of nudity, or not even maybe not even nudity. I mean, in the original Mass Effect, you would have sex with the women and they wouldn't be clothed normally. Which was weird anyway to begin with, because that always blew my mind. I'm like, who has sex with a bra on or a top on?
Hey, don't make fun of my relationship.
I guess that's akin to women probably asking, why has that guy got socks on?
That's true.
Go ahead, Patrick. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think, the one thing that we have going for us is, as we've all said it before, graphics are getting better and more realistic and more. If Cyberpunk 2077 is any indicator of what the future is, I mean, that is some pretty good looking skin textures in that game. And we're playing it on a Series X. I mean, because that game has sex in it. And I would admit there's only like a few times that you can interact with that in the game. You can create a relationship, and you can do it that way. You can interact with the Joy Toys, which is basically the same thing as a prostitute in the real world. Or you can get the blonde chick in the beginning if you call her up on your phone and be like, I want to get to know you better type stuff. I don't think it's as prevalent as like what I don't know. Maybe Rush, you saw something more than I did. I know the big dildo controversy in that game, but they were basically saying it was a bug. And I will admit, I don't think I've seen one in the last 3 or 4 playthroughs I played in the game.
Because you've played it a little bit more than I have, and I want to have an open conversation about this. Those 3 things that you said, did any 3 of those things had anything to do with the story truly?
Yes.
Or were they side things?
Well, I mean, the one is the main storyline for the companions. Mm-hmm. So you can end.
So it's a companion storyline, not the main storyline.
Right. Exactly. So you can forge a relationship with the companion. You don't have to, and you don't have to have sex at all in the game if you don't want to. That's the whole point of the game. Is that
you don't have a sign that when you walk out the door that a girl's licking a bottle. I mean, I laugh about it, but I'm just saying.
Yes. I will admit there's.
I'm not saying that that's not. It's rated M for mature. That's what it is.
It's a dystopian game too. I mean, you have to understand that
so every
the oldest profession in the world. Yeah. The oldest profession in the world will come back in a world that's dystopian. I mean, I mean, as much as we all say that everybody's civilized and everybody is modern, as soon as anything happens, the monkey brain is going to take over.
When you go to a dystopia, yes, I agree with you there. I mean, I get that. That's part of. I mean, if a dystopia means that you go to your most primal understandings, and I get that. It's just like I said, it's just, isn't there a way?
There comes a point where it's too much.
Well, I mean, even in this game, like I say, it's rated M for mature. I kind of I don't want to discredit or be argumentative on Patrick's point, because what Patrick's saying is like, hey, this is a dystopian game. This is what the older French. I get that. It's just the balance sometimes for myself is just I like it to be in the story. Like I will think while I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna think about a game. I remember a game where like the relationship was such a balance within the story. I cannot remember what game it was, and it was just really, really cool. And we've played it in the last year, and I can't think about what game it was. And it's just killing me right now. But I'll shut up and I'll think about it. Then I'll come up with it here in a minute.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, as video game graphics get better, it seems like things are a little more lax too. I remember, if you got into an adult scene when the games were younger, they were not like nude. They were mostly full clothed. I think in the last 10, maybe 15 years, it's kind of gotten a little bit more to where a sex scene was a full on like softcore porn scene. I mean, in any game that you can think of that you have a relationship now, they're literally like softcore porn. And, and that's something that you have to watch out for when you have younger kids, because you don't want to introduce them to that type of stuff when they're at this young age. But most of the games are rated mature that have that in there. So, there's a little bit of something. And they usually will say, like, sexual content or nudity, so it's a little easy to pick out in games like that to protect them. As an adult, it doesn't bother me as much. Like, I honestly completely forgot about all the ads, Russ, that you were talking about. And even though we were sending them back and forth in Messenger, I even completely forgot, because Shane was sending the video, the meme with the guy peeking out over the girl's butt,
Yep.
And then I sent Shane I sent the video in chat of the girl licking the beer bottle because of and it was just it's all sexual advertisement and we've all heard the cliche before, sex sells. And so I mean, in a dystopian society I could see that, but in all honesty I've become desensitized to it from playing the game so much. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot all that stuff was in the game because I had blinders onto it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm playing the game for the story and stuff like that, and and stuff like that. And to some extent, the sex scenes in this game are pretty gratuitous. I mean, literally, the only thing that's keeping it from not being softcore is if there was penetration of some kind. So, I mean,
you haven't seen a DLC,
right?
For me, it's like for Cyberpunk, yeah, I've gotten the same way too. I played it enough that stuff I just don't even think about it when I go buy it. But for me, it's like I hate sex scenes in anything, movies, games. It doesn't matter.
Bedroom,
not in bedroom, but and the reason why that is because I don't think they add anything to anything, right? I hate movies that like you're watching like an action movie, let's say, and then they have this like 10-minute sex scene, and I'm like, I don't care about this part.
Breath away.
Like, yeah, exactly. I don't care about this part. Let's just do the whole thing where they start and then it fades and then it comes back. That's all I care about because I know what
just
happens
like
here.
real life.
I don't care about this part. And it's the same thing with the sex in games. I don't care about this part. This doesn't add anything to me personally. This doesn't add anything to what I'm doing, right? I don't give a crap about that. I just hate it. It's just like it's so annoying. It's like they added in just because they can, right? Or just because they need to make time.
Just like Pat said.
Or yeah, I guess. But I mean, like in think about it in movies or in like TV shows or something like where they have like some sort of sex scene, regardless if it's PG-13 or PG or whatever, like kissing scene, sex scene, anything where nothing happens, but they just do that. Right? They just have sex or they just kiss or whatever. I was like, I don't care. Let's just skip this and go on with the movie or whatever. Like, I don't give a crap about that. Like, the two are, okay, we get the idea. Let's move on, right?
Yep.
That's the way I feel about
That's
it.
funny. That's funny you mentioned that because video games used to do that. Yeah, just fade to black.
And I would rather
sexy.
have that
Yeah.
because I don't care about the whole. I know what happens. I've done it before. I know what goes on between it. I don't need to see it. I get it. Yeah, I can use
But
my
Nick, you're not
imagination.
13 years old trying to look at the blurred out
I
channel.
guess not. I mean, maybe it's because I'm older, but I mean, shoot, I just don't care. Like I've done the sex scenes in Cyberpunk. I don't care. Like I don't look them out.
But-
I don't fill them out.
but
I just
There
I give a,
there is the key. You just said you've done the sex scenes because you could, right? I mean, so did you partake in the Joy Toys, Nick?
I did partake.
Both
in
of
it.
them
I
or
did
just
Toy
one?
Toy twice. Once by myself, and then the second time I bought a Plowmaster 3000. You can use your imagination to figure out what that is, and hoping we would use it, but we didn't. So in the end, after that, like after that 2 experiences with it, I will never go back to it. Like I don't care. Like
Yeah, I
the
mean,
fact
it-
it's there,
exactly.
no.
It's
It was really more of an experiment just to see like, okay,
it was.
what happens if I talk to them? And then they're like, oh, okay, you can pay the money. Okay, well, what happens if I pay the money? Like, what do I see? Like, what experiences am I going to have with this?
and you see it all.
And then you see it all, right? And then I was like, okay, what if I buy this and do it again? Then what happens then? And nothing happens. It's the same thing. It's a different experience, right?
That would be a X-rated video game. If
Oh
the
yeah,
Plowmaster
well it
came
would.
into play.
That's what I was hoping for, but it didn't happen. So I was like, okay, well then I don't care. And regardless if they used it or not, let's say if they did use it, then that would be
Say.
funny, right? Just to see it in a video game. But that was really what the extent was, just to see it in a video game. It was really just a comedic effect for me, and not really some sort of any other effect to visualize or experience that part of the game. It was just really just to see what was. It was more curiosity than anything.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But
And
you had to. But that's why Leisure Suit Larry is never really talked about in the fashion that we are, because it was so over the top and cartoony
well, I mean,
and
But
fake.
Leisure
Leisure
Suit
And,
Leisure Suit circles around that, right? That's the whole point of Leisure Suit.
Right.
Larry.
That's the whole point. It's
Whereas
like an over-the-top.
Cyberpunk is
sexual-
not about that. I mean, it has that, but it's not the
Well, see,
story and everything is not about that, right? Whereas Leisure Suit is about that. That's the whole point of Leisure Suit, Larry.
Right. I mean, I will admit that that a lot of times the sex scenes and nudity in a game do not further the game at all. I will agree with that because, I mean, we'll take a perfect example of even a modern video game. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you have sex, but guess what? You make out, screen goes to black, you wake up. I mean, and it conveys the point of something happened without going into like the whole scene, the tirade, and all that stuff. I mean, yeah, video games, in my opinion, will be just fine if they took it out and didn't have it. But I mean, it's part of it is that you have to let them have creativity in their art. You know, if they want to do it, that's fine.
I think it's the same with movies and TV. If they took it out, I mean, because if you really want to see that stuff, there's a place for it, right?
The internet.
We can easily get to that stuff if we really.
What's the internet for, Shane?
My dad's drawer collection.
Yeah, back in the day it was, but nowadays
they even have a song about it. The internet's for porn.
I mean,
it really is. I mean, if you want to see that stuff, you have a place for it. Otherwise, just get rid of it because there's no point to it unless it's an integral part of the story, and it somehow involves the story in some way that is intricate to what's going on. Then there's just no need for it.
Yeah. Well,
I will say that there's no need to show it. Yeah. I mean, in my opinion,
agree.
To some extent, sex sometimes conveys the pairing or bonding of two people. You know, in like any of the storytelling games, BioWare is big on it. You know, you as Commander Shepard can get with some of the crew members, you know, either through rompous sex or you can basically partner up with one of them and become, you know, pair bonded. You know, the same thing in like even in Cyberpunk, you can have a relationship, and the relationship to, in my opinion, it conveys more meaning if something like that happens. Whereas if you just play the game and you go, hey, you want to be my girlfriend, or hey, you want to be my boyfriend, and they say yes, you're like, cool, story's on, and you just move on, don't think about it. But to me, it conveys more feeling when you know that that's occurred between the two of them. And I mean, I don't have to see it. I could care less too about seeing it. It's artists. It's basically how the artist wants us to see the game. If they want me to see it, fine, you know, whatever. It's not like I am going to seek those things out, but as you said the same thing, Nick, I tried the Joy Toys twice. I did it once and I was like, okay, cool. You know, because you crack jokes with them, because the one chick says, hey, you want what I got, $100? And you're like, what am I going to do? Go in the alley and do it? And she's like, what do I look like? An animal? I got an apartment, you know, and, you know, just comedic stuff like that. And then you pay the eddies and you're just like, oh, so we really are doing this. And so, you know, and then the same thing you had, I just was like, can you do this more than once? And so, yes, you can. And that's all I've done just twice, just to do that. And I'm like, I don't have a need to see it again. You know, if I wanted to see real porn, I can watch the internet. Or if I want to do it, then I will go hit up the girlfriend and be like, hey, you want to feel a little frisky? Let's go. You know, I don't have a need for that type of stuff.
Well, my problem really is like, you know, when we, at the very beginning of this, it was when it was just unnecessary. The Last of Us game, the original, there was no sex scenes. There was an amazing, and this is my point. Jasmine, my 13-year-old daughter, loves the first game. Absolutely loved it. She was just so adamant about it. So I let her play 2. The problem is there's a scene in there with some dude on, sex scene with 2 characters in there. So I had to monitor her gameplay so I could go in and get that pass for her, because I don't want her seeing that, period. I would rather her see Ellie lop. Yeah, nobody. I'd rather see her, you know, her lop dudes' heads off than what they were showing. I think that scene was completely unneeded, unwanted, and unnecessary, and that broke my heart, because the game, you know, has issues as it is, but my daughter shouldn't have to worry about things like that.
They could convey what we just said earlier. They could have just cut to black as it was getting hot and heavy, and you just use your imagination.
Yeah,
Right.
we understand those
I
two
mean-
cared about each other and there was a relationship, blah blah blah.
Right, and
But-
like Shane said, I think that scene was unnecessary. Like, it didn't add anything to it. It was
No,
a scene even for me that, even for all of us that probably watched some suggestive things, would go. I mean, for me, it was like, ooh. That's all.
Yeah.
That's the point I made. In that point was like, I don't want to
Yeah.
see that.
oh, you're absolutely right. I was pretty nasty, but it was an unnecessary nasty. It was an unwanted nasty. I don't know anybody who wanted to see that. I don't know anybody who was like, oh yeah, that was awesome. No, it wasn't. Nobody wanted it, and it doesn't matter if the character was attractive or not. It was the entire situation of the scene. It was completely unneeded and unnecessary.
Yeah, I don't.
It was almost like it was added, right? I mean, because like even that scene, you can kind of feel some tension between the two, yes, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of that scene in particular. I didn't think it would go that route, right? It wasn't like something like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen. Like, no, I didn't think that. It was just like, oh, they're just fighting and arguing, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, and I was like, ugh, and it's over, and I was like, I didn't want that. Like, they could have just ended it like right there with them arguing or leave, and that'd be it.
And that's part of the thing that he just interjects in the story. I mean, you don't even expect it, and then it just happens, and you're like, I didn't even get an option not to partake in this.
Yeah, you were literally taken out of the game, out of the story, for something that had zero input. Zero not input, but meaning.
Get hit a lot,
right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, so since since you guys are talking about that, do you think that the sex is too prevalent in video games now?
Yes and no. I think the concept of sex in a game is fine. I think that because it's part of life. I do think that it can be taken too far. The fade to black situation of Mass Effect, for instance. Did you all understand what was going to happen when it happened?
Yes.
Were you all like rubbing your nuts, going, "Oh, come on"? Yeah. Yeah, no, none of us were that way, and most gamers are not that way. Most gamers, I think, are a lot more mature than given credit for. Even younger gamers, it's an unnecessary thing. Now, if it's part of the story and it means something, it's perfectly fine. But I don't think you need to go into Last of Us Part 2 situation.
Well, here's the question though: how do you make how is sex in a video game or nudity meaningful? That's the question, because in my opinion, you don't need that.
In my opinion, you don't need it either. I don't think in games or in movies or in TV. Like, there is, I mean, unless you have a particular material that in any of these facets that calls for that for a particular reason, there is no other reason to have there's no other reason to have it other than just for shock value or whatever, right? Whereas, violence is a separate thing. We talked about violence in sex. This is the conversation we're having. Where I think violence is a little bit more lenient in the fact that if you have a action movie, right, you're expecting violence, right? And you're expecting these things. Whereas if you have a movie about sex, right, or it's a sexual movie, sure. But if you have a movie that doesn't really congeal with these two aspects, then why throw them in, right? And that becomes the case of violence or even sex. I think violence, again, it's a little bit more sensitized in society than sex is. So I think that it gets a little bit more of a pass than sex. But again, in my perspective, like, I don't have a problem with sex in general. This is not like a parent talking like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they put it in there. Like, let me go to the parent council and talk to them about it. It's like more of the fact that a lot of games and a lot of movies and TV and various things like that add these things in there for more of an aspect of shock value than anything, right? Or just putting them in there because they can, whereas they don't need to be there, right? If violence or sex in a movie, in a game, in whatever adds to the story of this particular movie or game or whatever, then okay. But if you're just putting it there just to put it there, right, then why was it there to begin with, right? There's no point in putting it in there. You just put it there because you could. It wasn't because it needed to be there. It's just because you could put it there. And you decided, I'm going to put this scene in here because I can. It has no plot value. It has nothing to do with anything. I'm just going to stick it there because I can put it there.
Okay. So there's two sides to that. I mean, I guess in my opinion, like I don't necessarily need to see the scene, but the intended or the inferred sex scene, if they cut to black, in my opinion, is not a needed, but is a plot point, because it's a plot point that says, hey, you're either getting in a relationship or you're fleeing with this girl or whatever. In aspect of like your companions and stuff like that in video games, I'm fine with that. And to some extent, I don't honestly care if the sex scene is fully there or if it cuts to black. I don't care, to be honest, because I don't need video games for porn. But let's just take for example the current game that we've just got done playing and reviewed. Cyberpunk. In my opinion, sex is a pivotal point. Excuse me, can't speak. in the type of genre that they're in, but yet it doesn't do anything. Like being able to have sex with a joy toy doesn't progress the story and doesn't do anything. But I do think that having like the ads and all that stuff everywhere kind of pushes across the point in the game that sex sells. I mean, everywhere you're at in that game, you see ads on the TV, you see banners, you see posters, you see everything in the game they're selling something, buying, the whole game is based around that. I mean, they sell these things called brain dances to people so they can experience pleasure, or they can experience experiences they wouldn't be able to have outside of the brain dances. I mean, in my opinion, those are pivotal points of the pivotal. Gosh, I cannot speak at all in that word. Pivotal point of the game. What would you say, Nick, to that? Do you think it is or not?
For something like Cyberpunk, yes, because Cyberpunk in this situation, and it was kind of like what I was saying before, Cyberpunk puts that out front and forward, right? Like you said, this is a commodity or a currency in this dystopian society, right? And it's everywhere, right? You see it everywhere. It's on every street corner. It's on every billboard and every sign. So yes, not necessarily having sex with the companions that you get along with, but it's kind of like for them, it's kind of like you assume that's going to happen because it's so prevalent in the game, right? It's just so everywhere. Whereas if this game didn't have any of that stuff, like let's say Cyberpunk didn't have any of that stuff, right? Like all the ads and there was no dildos everywhere, and sex wasn't a thing. There's no joy toys on the corners or anything like that. Then would you say, should this be added into this type of future? Because this type of future doesn't seem to be that way, right? Where I would say probably no in that case. Like I don't think there's a justification for it. Whereas, kind of like Mass Effect, right? Mass Effect doesn't have any of that stuff. And I understand you can get with your companions, and I understand you can, and I've done that in Mass Effect, and yeah.
But there's no nudity, but there is sex.
There is no nudity, but there is sex scenes, yes. And so do I think that they have an added value? No, I don't, right? And the reason why I don't is because I don't, even though you can have your companions to become close to them, without the needed reward of getting to that point, I don't see a purpose to it. There's no purpose to it, right? Because I don't know. Maybe the way that the situation goes in Mass Effect, where you're Commander Shepard, and maybe you have, in the first one you have sex with what's her name?
Miranda, I think.
Miranda. Yeah, you have sex with Miranda. Well, in the second one, it doesn't matter, right? That you had sex with Miranda. And maybe that's the way the game kind of works out. But
that's also not true though. I mean, because in that game, if you have, and Miranda's not the right one. Miranda's the black haired girl in. I'm talking about the what species is? Oh my god, I can't believe.
Talking about the blue girl, right?
Blue girl, yeah. If you have sex with her in the game and pair bond with her to some extent, that story continues on in the other one to where you guys have interactions and stuff. But I mean, it continues.
Yeah, I agree with that. But they made the blue-haired one. Was it Laura, Lorena, something like that?
I think it was. I can't remember. Yeah,
Listerine.
Yeah, Listerine. But they made her a pivotal part of the story, right?
Right.
But almost
regardless
every
if you had sex with her or not. No, I mean, but she's more pivotal, right? I mean, she's still in the story and still a centerpiece to the whole game.
It was Liara. That's
Miranda, whereas Miranda is not.
That was close,
right? So it wasn't necessarily in that sense where like, oh well, if you do this with her, she's going to become a pivotal point of the game. It's like no, they already decided that part, right? So doing it with her or not doesn't matter.
But
right?
it changes the interactions through the story.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one game that's hard point to sell because
I don't think having sex with her mattered in the sense of it's more of getting a close bond just because you bump uglies.
Well, that's part of
not
the
necessarily
bond
because with Liara, for example, if you bond and have a relationship with Liara, it changes the story interaction through the whole game because at some point in 2 or 3, it's just been a while since I played. She's not on your crew, but you run into her on like the space station, and it's kind of awkward. And at some point, her mom is on your ship, and you can get with her mom, and then it becomes really more awkward. It is one of those things.
There is cause and effect.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you just bang it and move on. That game has like lasting effects through the series. So in my opinion, you can interact, but like let's say that they came out.
I mean, do they have to truly bang? Right. I mean,
they don't have to.
Comes down.
I mean, they don't have to, but I mean, at some point,
I think they do.
Well,
I think that's part of. No, and that's not to be perverse. It's part of the relationship schematic. I mean, did you guys not have physical relationships with your spouses or wives or girlfriends? Right. Yes, you do. That's part of life. But what Pat's saying, and I fully agree with, is that game does play the sexual part out in more of the relationship aspect, not just a boyfriend-girl relationship.
Well, maybe the
overall relationship.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is just
maybe
a bad
that game does a better idea or a better job of it than most.
Right.
That game does it correctly.
I was just gonna say because you can make things super awkward by getting with Liara's mom after you've been with her. I mean,
Cyberpunk has no. I don't think Cyberpunk has any general in a lot of games, in a lot of games, they don't have a general premise for doing it, right? I mean, it's just there.
They don't have true relationship statuses.
Right. Now, Mass Effect may have done a better job of that because they are storytellers, they're RPGs. And so, that may have a better effect on it. Cyberpunk is an RPG, but I think that aspect is second hand.
Right. They're not like they're going to continue. They're not going to make a Cyberpunk 2 or a Cyberpunk 3 or something like that. They may make something similar, but yeah, I mean, certain games can do it. And I get what you're saying now by pivotal part of the story because, in my opinion, Mass Effect does that. But I don't need to see the sex scene. I don't care if you cut to black. I don't care if you show it or not, to my opinion.
As long as I agree. Yeah. I don't care if they cut to black either. It's not the cutting to black part that's the problem. It's the whole
brown chicken, brown cow.
It's the whole situation going on. Like we don't need to see that, and it's the same as in movies as well. It's like you add that aspect into the movie or into the game, and it's like it's a non-needed aspect. We know what happens. right? Who are you trying to convince? You're trying to convince the people that don't know, or or what? Like we don't, it's like let's just flash forward and get through that because we know how that all goes, and let's move on. And the same
Okay.
thing with movies. Like if a movie has it, I don't mind if it has it. It's just like we don't need to see. Like I hate, and this is one thing I hate about movies. I hate the movie parts where they're sitting there and they kiss for like 10 minutes long, and they're like making out and they're slowly taking clothes off and stuff like that, and then it fades to black. I hate that. It's just like just fade to black at the beginning because we get the idea.
Nick's sitting there going, "What am I supposed to do?"
I'm
feel
just
like the third wheel here.
I just want to fast forward through the whole part. I'm just like,
Nick's
yeah,
like, I'm
I
the
get
third
it.
wheel here.
Yeah, exactly. Like I get the aspect. It's like I think of like 007 movies. 007 movies, which I love, but they do that same thing too. And it's just like, yeah, we get it. Just and 007 does do the fade to black thing, but they do that. As 007 movies
They
have
take too
gone,
much time to
they
get
take
to it.
way too long to get to the point of the fade to black. And it's like, come on, let's just get to that and let's move on with the action because that's
Well,
what I want to see.
So here's a question for you, Nick. Since you're not big into this, have you played the Leisure Suit Larry games?
Um,
I know the answer. Don't lie.
Because I'm going to ask if you have why.
I have, but only like the original ones. Like Leisure Suit Larry is not.
So you played like the 8-bit Leisure Suit Larry?
Yeah, Leisure Suit Larry is not. For me personally, Leisure Suit Larry is not in a game in general, right? It's not
comedy.
my. It's not really my cup of tea. I'm not really big into the Leisure Suit series, so I played the original, and that's about probably the extent of what I played.
Interesting. Okay. Because
Well-
I was kind of wondering if you played those, because those games are all about just trying to get. I mean, that it's comedic.
Right,
In my
and
opinion,
that's
they're
what,
comedic.
and that's what those games are about, right? I mean,
Right.
and that's fine.
You know what you're getting
right?
into when you
Because
pick
those
that
are,
game.
yeah, exactly. You know what you're getting into. That's what those games are, right? So if you're playing them thinking like, oh, I'm waiting for that deep content, it's like you're playing Leisure Suit Larry. Come on. And so you know if you know what those games are, and I know what those games are, and it's not like if you told me to sit down and play a Leisure Suit Larry, would I say no? No, I wouldn't. I would play it.
But
I
you know what
just-
you're in for.
Yeah, I know what I'm in.
Pants on or
And, well, if I'm alone or not, or it actually doesn't matter. But
Yeah, it's all cartoon.
it's all crazy.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like those games, I've never seeked them out personally. But like if let's say in a hypothetical, like Shane bought me a Leisure Suit Larry game and said, "Hey, I want you to play it and play through it." Would I play through it? Sure. Yeah, I definitely would. And would I have a fun time playing it? Probably. Yeah. I mean, I like the original Leisure Suit Larry, so why wouldn't I like the other ones? But I know what type of game it is, so I know exactly what you guys said. I know what I'm getting into. I know what type of game it is. I know what I'm going to be playing, and that's not a problem, right? It's the games that I have a problem with are the games that are something else, and then they add this in just for
The sake of having it in.
exactly. And
know.
that part I just don't like. And the same thing with movies, right? If I know if it's a sex movie, I'm not going to be pissed off if there's sex in it, right? If I'm watching
Nick's mad 'cause he
Showgirls
rented a
and there's
porno.
naked girls on the screen, I'll be like, what the heck? I didn't order this, but no.
But yeah,
I
if you're in the
jumped
middle of Sesame Street, you don't want that popping up because it's
Right,
something
exactly.
you shouldn't be seeing. You're not expecting to be seeing.
Right.
So, I mean,
like Fifth Element. Fifth Element's one of my favorites, and it does have boobies in it, but that
it
type of
doesn't have
movie-
to be there, though.
It doesn't have to be there, but it's not there. It's more there for comedic effect, and who doesn't like Mila Jovovich? So put it that way.
I don't really care for her anymore.
Nah.
Last
Stop. Yeah, blasphemy.
She's kind of a
But,
twat.
for shame, for shame.
Don't
but-
get me wrong. She's a very attractive woman, but I don't know. She's pretty much ruined
Whatever,
Resident Evil.
Yeah,
and
Shane. Shane's getting old
Go to
now. We
sleep.
know that his eyesight's going.
She's still, like I said, she's still an attractive woman.
So back on the video game thing, I will agree that I could take it or leave it, but in a game like Cyberpunk, I think it's a plot point. It's because it's the type of game it is. A game like, we'll take an example. A game like Mass Effect, or even the other BioWare games, Dragon Age and stuff like that, because they have sex scenes in those games as well. I could take it or leave it. Honestly, it could fade to black, as long as you understand that that's happened. Because in my opinion, it is a plot point. Because if I'm working to make a relationship with someone in the game, because remember, when I play, I'm an immersive player. I'm like, I like that player. I want them to be my companion. And when I say companion, significant other, or pair bonded, or whatever the type of moniker the game is using to convey that, you've made it when they let you in their pants. I mean, that's the whole point of, in most life and relationships. You know that you've made it with that person for the most part. If you're trying to create a relationship, I'm going to talk about a one night stand here, because you've made it a one night stand when you get in their pants as well. But for the most part, when you're dating and you're thinking of like a serious relationship, you're putting work into it. And when you think they're putting work into the relationship too, when you have relations with that person, sexual relations with that person, that it's at a real point at this point. It's not like, oh, it's just a fling and we're 2 dates in and they could be seeing somebody else and whatever type stuff. But as soon as you get into that sexual relationship, it's kind of a we're a deal now type thing.
Yeah.
So I think video games can convey that too, whether they cut to black or however they want to do it. I'm fine with that. I don't have to see the scene.
Right. I agree too with that, and
Yeah.
my whole point is I don't have to see the whole thing. Like, I don't want to see the whole thing. For me, it's just a waste of time to see the
But
whole
you are
thing.
given the option to skip it, so
Right.
Yeah, and I think they should all give you that option. I think that should be a mandatory thing.
To skip it or something like that. Like, I don't mind the fade to black. If they want to do the fade to black thing, that's fine.
just
But,
go 10 minutes of making out first.
Yeah, no 10 minutes of making out and stuff. It's just annoying. Like, I get it. I get what they're getting to. I know where they're going. I know where this road leads. Let's just get through it and get over with it, because regardless if it plays into the story or not, for me, it's like, for me personally, it's like, I just don't, like I said earlier, if I want to see that stuff and I want to see the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle, I know where to find that.
Okay.
Otherwise, let's move on and continue the story.
So here's what we all should have learned by this from now. We're in the 2020s now. When we were in 1995, it might have been a different story, because we were all like 15 to 20 years old. Hormonal driven teens, we'd have been like, yeah, I want to see it, because we didn't have access to the internet for porn like we do now. But I would say in today's day and age, it's not necessarily needed, not even needed to that point. Just there's no reason for
Reasoning.
it. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I have reasoning and reasons why I think it should be in at certain points, but just the gratuitous part on a game that's not a plot point. Cyberpunk 2077, it's a plot point. It has to be in there because that's the dystopian portion of it. But for the most part, I don't see it in most video games prevalent. I mean, when you think of The Witcher, especially like Witcher 3, there's the Yennefer and Geralt scene. That's it. I mean, there's maybe a little bit more nudity, but that's the sex scene. And in Mass Effect, you do it when you mate with one of your companions, and the same thing with Dragon Age. So, I mean, it's not like video games are just out, like, it's not like you're running around the whole video game unless it's a plot point. Because, I mean, technically in Cyberpunk 2077, you can run around the whole game naked if you wanted. People interact with you differently and stuff. But
And with the bugs, sometimes you do.
yeah, and you don't even know it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think sex has gotten more prevalent or less prevalent in video games. I think that certain video games highlight it more than others, like Grand Theft
It's
Auto.
more detailed than it used to be by far.
Exactly. But I don't need it in video games, and I mean, maybe 15-year-old me would have said something different. So that means a couple of things.
Booty, booty.
It's going to happen.
Right.
Eventually, with a video game, it's going to happen.
On some games,
Well,
yeah.
it's already happened. It's just not on console.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's going to get to that point, right? I mean,
That's true.
Even with Cyberpunk, and like you guys have said, yeah, I mean, the areas of men and women are pretty prevalent in that game, and even during the sex scenes, it's pretty much, besides penetration, you pretty much get the gist of everything else that's going on.
Right.
So, it's just going to get to that point eventually. I think.
Well, I mean, we talked about this too before. The death nail for any video game is to get the what's the worst
AO.
rated AO, yeah, adult only. So, if Cyberpunk can't get an adult only rating, the only thing that you're going to have is mass sex. I mean, you're going to have to just basically go all out and just be like the worst game, not the worst game, but it's just the whole game is if you could run around Cyberpunk nude the whole time and not get an AO rating and have sex with joy toys and all this stuff.
Well, that's because
then-
they're extending that out. They're extending
Right.
that rating out.
Right.
Where that
But I'm
rating's
just saying-
going to be this AO is going to be like the most gratuitous. I me's going to be like one dude in a jar. Type
But here's
thing.
the thing: is that they only
Dude,
review.
you had to bring up the jar.
But I'm just trying to make a point here because they only review video games, and video game is a kind of a weird genre because if you go on Steam, for example, you can download and buy all of these adult only type titles, but they're not rated or reviewed by the video game review, the ESRB. You notice that?
Yep.
Like those dating sims and all that type of stuff that are all over like Steam and stuff like that. And then the game that we joked about, it's not even really a game, but it's the doll thing that we were joking about. That's not an ESR because they're not classified as games. So that's how a lot of those, because they don't have adult only titles, but on PC they're branded as nudity or sexual things, but they're not rated by the ESRB because they're not. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's because they're not technically considered a video game because all they are is just a sexualized encounter game where the whole
But you
point of
have
the
to-
game is.
But you have to think about it this way. It's also a cultural thing. Look at Japan. Look at even England. The differences between how they perceive what is moral and what is not, what is right and what is wrong.
Well, I mean, you can take
they're
anybody for
very
example.
different.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll just because we're in the middle of those two. Because Japan and China basically consider everything that's sexual a taboo. I mean, in any of the stuff that we see, it's like really taboo to see that stuff. But if you go over to
But-
like Europe, and
But
go to
Japan
Europe,
is very, very sexualized.
but it's also very, very censored.
No.
Yes. Yes.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. They have a very set censorship, but I mean, they show breastises all over TV.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
Their
You-
games are all about sex, and they have a lot of uncensored stuff as well.
No. Japan and sex in video games is not uncensored for the most part. You need to look that stuff up again because it's often pretty highly censored over there. But what I was going to say is I was going to point out that in the U.S. we sexualize a breast, we sexualize boobs, but in like Japan and Europe and all that stuff, those are not considered sexual organs. So they don't censor that stuff because they're not considered a sex. They're not as if we would call it. We're not as prude as we are in America, where boobs are. We have people marching in the street to free the nipples so the women can run around topless and stuff like that. Because we view, as a country overall, as a whole, we view the female breast as a sexual organ and not something other than that. But in like Europe and all other parts of the country, they don't view it that way. But sex in video games and sex in manga and stuff like that is highly censored in Japan.
Just look at
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, because if you look at some certain things online, you will see that it's all blurred out.
And just so you know,
So what
I will
you're
tell
saying
you,
is
I'll tell you
clearly
one more thing.
browsing history.
Just one more thing. Did you know that Last of Us 2 was censored in Japan? The sex
Yes,
scene?
it was.
Okay. So that should tell you that they're a
I
little
wish
bit
it
more
was
prude.
censored in the
Well,
U.S.
that's because it was actually very, very gross, and nobody should have ever seen that.
Listen, I mean, regardless of what your thoughts are on there, it's still a guy on a girl action,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's to be determined.
It doesn't matter what your thoughts are, but I'm just saying it's a guy on a girl, and it doesn't matter if it was guy on guy, girl on girl, whatever the orientation is. Japan is a highly censored sexual culture. Like, you're not going to see penetration, you're not going to see sexual organs because they censor that stuff. That's what I'm saying. So, but you look at us when we have in the U.S. when we have porn, nothing is censored. It's all out on the taking. People do whatever they want. There's things that are considered taboo and that you don't do, and that there's laws in the books, for things like bestiality and stuff like that. That's just, that they're just put out there on the books. But if you go over like Europe, they run around shirtless for women, and it's no big deal because it's a non-sexual organ for them. But over here, we're like, if it's covered by clothes all the time, it's a sexual organ. I don't want to see your belly. I don't want to see this and that, and I don't want to see your butt. But
I saw your ankles.
right? Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. Times change, and eventually, I feel that the U.S. will probably be on board with where women run around topless because it is what it is. There's always going to be perverts, and I guarantee if you go over to Europe, there's perverts over there when a woman runs around with her top off or whatever. There's guys just oogling it because there is something wired, and it goes back to that whole nature versus nurture thing. Are we as Americans, they consider like a TNA guy? Are you a boobs or butt guy? And it's like I think it's because. Is that because of the way that we're brought up, that those are considered taboo to see? Or is it because of your brain is wired that way? I don't know. Because of where we live. I mean, I guess it would take a major study to go over to like Europe or Italy or these countries where that stuff's just not norm and say, hey, how do you, and look at the general population, because you can't just take a census of like 1 or 2, but take a census of like 30% of the population and get a baseline and say, ask them anonymously, are boobs sexual to you? Are breasts sexual to you? And stuff like that. And as much as the world pays for plastic surgery for boobs, I think it is still sexualized, even though that it's just out free in the market. I mean, go overseas, they have a lot of nude beaches, and we don't have that type of stuff over here. It's just the way it is. Beaches. But not as prevalent as like if you go over to Italy and
you're Shane's backyard.
Yeah, we don't want to see Shane's backyard. But
we're talking about my pool, right?
But like I said, I'm in agreement with you, Nick, to some extent. I don't need to see it as long as you tell me that it's, as long as you're hinting that it's going on, like Fade to Black or cueing it of some kind, I'm fine with that. As long as the game portrays, as long as the game, it's not a plot point in the game like Cyberpunk. Russ, you've been really quiet, man. I mean,
I was about to say the same thing. Russ, are you Googling?
No, I'm not. I'm just sitting here, just listening to y'all go on. I mean, it went from a video game podcast to a societal podcast back to a video game. It was pretty interesting. I mean, I was just sitting there listening. I mean, I think just to help everybody, to help the audience and everything, like really, in actuality, all 4 of us kind of agree. It's a slight oddity. If it's not needed, if it's not pertaining to the storyline, then why have it? My only thing that I would add to anything is that I do sometimes believe that these things can minorly add to a storyline, i.e., somebody coming back, like you're coming back from a war. Let's say you have a story where you're coming back from the war, and your wife has been waiting for you so long, and they do a little fade to black, and then maybe a robber comes in and it turns into a revenge type of game or something like that because they've murdered your family or something. So there's sex and violence all in about 15 seconds. But the point being is that it can add to a story sometimes, and kind of follow back on something that Patrick was saying. Or actually, how about I propose a question to everybody real quick and just try to get some quick answers on this. Is that with Cyberpunk, if you took out the toys and the hookers and all that stuff, does it take away from what the video game is?
Yes, because what would you put in its place? What would you put in its place?
What do you need? Why do you need the toy stuff in order to get through the video game?
Because your immersion in the dystopian society. Now, the dildo thing they obviously said was a misnomer. I mean, obviously they don't need to be dildos everywhere you turn, and that's how the game was, and it's fixed. I'm not, like I said, in 2 play sessions, I'm not running into 1. So
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual parts where you go off on the side stories to get these acts done. Where does that fall into the story of your character?
So my character's trying to get with Judy, so I got with Judy. That was what my character was trying to do.
But if they took that out, would the game be less?
Well, yes, because the relationship's not complete.
If there was no
Russ,
nothing,
if there was no side companion, then they're not working towards a companionship thing. But that's something they offer. They offer you a companion in the game to make it feel more complete. Like, it doesn't matter who you are in life. 90% of the population in the world wants to be with somebody. So,
No, I'm not saying that. I'm simply
but
saying
that's the point of
the game
immersion in a
itself.
video game. That's immersion in a video game. I want a video game as an immersion and
Well,
extension of myself.
that's
So,
your opinion in that
but
in
you
that
just
sense.
asked that my opinion,
Yeah.
and I'm telling you my
Yeah.
opinion,
Yeah.
that it
And
does take away from the game because, in my opinion, my chick wants to be with somebody or my
Right.
dude wants to be with somebody, and I have the ability to choose because choices, the illusion of choice is there. I could choose to be with this person or that person or these people. So yes, that does. Now, the part where you get to make it with a Joy Toy, in my opinion, doesn't add anything to the story. It can be gone. You could see them on the street, but doesn't mean you have to partake in them, and that type of stuff. And also the sex scene with the blonde chick in the beginning. That doesn't add anything to the story besides going, yep, I could do it and I did it, So it doesn't take away or anything. But I think taking away the ads and the surrounding of it does take away from the world of the video game because what else are they going to put up on the video game ads? Because sex and money rules. In any type of society like that, sex and money rules. If you got sex, if you got money, you got power. If you got power, you want sex. It's all about pleasure. In a dystopian society, it's all about pleasure and instant gratification. And money and sex offer those. So what are you going to replace ads for alcohol that use sex? Because we have that in today's society. It's not as like in your face as the guy looking over the girl's butt in the advertisement in Cyberpunk, or the girl licking the beer bottle like it's something else and it's shaped phallic. It's not that on the nose, but heck, Hardee's does a commercial with a girl getting a wet T-shirt on a car eating a cheeseburger. Now, come on. I mean,
And by the way, I went and got
question-
that
the
cheeseburger.
question is only there to talk about the game. I'm not saying anything's right,
No,
wrong,
no.
or indifferent within
No, I'm
that.
just saying
I'm
that's
trying
how
to find out. I'm trying to find out what each person's view of those particular parts are on the game, particularly this game since we've most recently played it. So that's just what I was curious about, and I'd like to hear from Nick and Shane too, just so I understand. Do you believe those? Like Patrick was saying, like he gave those 3 examples. He said, I think my summary is correct, 2 out of the 3 particular scenes could have been left out, but the relational part of it could have been kept in. So what did you other 2 feel?
Well, in my opinion, I'm going to fully agree with Pat. A game like Cyberpunk, if you remove that out, it is removing a portion of the game. Now, a game like God of War, we talked about earlier, the sex scene, it was completely unneeded. It was just a gimmick. I don't believe it had any bearing of story or character or gameplay. And that could have been taken out. You know what? Nobody would have really cared. The game lived on by its merits alone. Now, a game like Cyberpunk, though, it is a part of the game. From the deepest part of it, it's not something that's, granted, I don't know. I don't know how to truly feel about how far they went with it, but with what they have done, it is part of the DNA of the game. And if you remove part of that, it's like removing a hand. You're missing a part of what's meant to be for the overall story. And that's the way I see it.
And Nick?
Yeah, with Cyberpunk as it is now, and as it is portrayed now, and as the dystopian future is reflective in the game, yes, I think that part, all those parts need to be there. And that's because that's just the setup for the game and the setup for the society and the world that they're in, right? Let's say Cyberpunk wasn't a old franchise, because it is an old pen and paper and this kind of stuff has been established. And let's say it's a brand new thing. Could they have gone with something different? Yeah, I think they could have. And could they have added something else or changed those aspects of the game? Yeah, they could have, right? Because they have a clean slate. Now, as far as this game, like I said, this is a game that's old. The game's not old, but the idea, the Cyberpunk 2077 is an old pen and paper game, and the franchise and the world and various things have been established for years now. So that is already set in stone, right? And so they kind of go with it. But if it was something brand new, they could have gone with anything. It doesn't need to have that. No, it doesn't. I mean, they could add anything in there that could become a currency or something like that in this dystopian future that they're projecting in the game. As far as sleeping with your the people that you meet and stuff like that. Yeah, I agree with Patrick in the sense that I want to get with Judy or I want to get with whatever, and this is because I know I can in the game. But if that wasn't something that you could do in the game, right, or an idea within the game, what I hoped or expected that it should have been. Not necessarily. Like, right, they could have had the side stories and everything without that part. And if that wasn't put out in the beginning, like this game was, portrayed in that sense, I probably wouldn't have given it a second thought. I just wish they would have added that, right? That wouldn't have more than likely wouldn't have never came to mind.
This game needs more booty for Judy.
So I'm just going to interrupt real quick. So Nick, you don't think about romance options in a game when you're playing, because like I said, it's probably just me, but I'm an immersive gamer. I want to immerse the game as if it was me playing the game. So
nope.
Like in a story-based game, I'm like, is there romance options in here?
A game like Mass Effect, yes.
I even for Mass Effect, just because of the fact that I know they're there, yes. If they weren't there, I would not give two craps about the fact that they weren't. I don't look for that in the game. I don't care about romance options. If you want to have a compelling side story and stuff, I don't care about, like, in the end I'm going to be able to hit that, right? I don't care about that part. So
it's about love.
No, it's not about love. It's not about any of that, right? It's about finishing the story up, right? Because it's even the romance part is kind of stupid in a sense where you're building a relationship through helping them take down a corporation and crap. I mean, it's just stupid how that relationship builds. It's like, oh, well, we're going to get, I mean, in the sense of Cyberpunk, it's like you just meet this person all of a sudden out of nowhere, you're best friends and you're the bestest friends ever, and now you want to sleep together. And it's just like, it's so superficial.
Nick, you just explained the relationship in 70% of the world.
Do you
not realize that?
Well, I mean,
do you not realize how you just explained that? Because internet dating has made that the norm.
Yeah,
I don't know this person, and guess what? We're going to go out on a date, and we're best of friends. So I'll disagree with you on this one, because I honestly think that in an immersive type game, I play the game as myself, and I'm like, okay.
In an immersive type game, I don't care about that part. Like, I don't care about the sex and stuff. It's all about the gameplay.
Well, I'm not talking about the sex and stuff, but I'm talking about building the relationship.
I don't care about building a relationship. Like, if I'm going to do that in real life, that's tough enough. I don't give a crap about having to play a game and just trying to make sure I send flowers and give them card.
Yeah, but in real life, you don't get coins.
Yeah, you don't get currency for that. No, it's all superficial in that sense. It's a sped up timeline of stupid events that happen to make you fall in love superficially.
I don't know you.
With this other person.
Why do you play games?
Yeah.
Why do you even play games? I
don't play games for that part. I don't play games that have sex.
You just basically
PC.
You basically just said a whole bunch of crap about this and that. It's sped up timelines, and you don't care about that. I'm like, a video game and anything is a sped up timeline. A video game,
but like, I'd rather have a sped up timeline where we progress the storyline
right now.
Where we progress the storyline, not where we progress whether or not me and you're going to bump uglies. That part I don't care about. If we're going to progress our friendship in a storyline and become closer as we go through these things, fine. But if our end goal is so that we can have sex on Saturday night, on the 23rd of whatever, because we've done all these things together, then I don't give a crap about that part. We can move on from that. I don't care. Like, my care part about that part is zero. I don't care about that. So in a sense of like Cyberpunk. Yeah, I want to get with Judy and Banger because I know I can because it's a part of the game. If it wasn't a part of the game, would I think, oh man, I wish that would happen? No, I don't, and I don't care that that would happen, and I wouldn't even thinking, man, I wish they would have added that in. That's the whole point I'm making. Like, if that wasn't there, let's say Cyberpunk came out and said you can't bang any of your companions, would I be like, oh man, well, man, that really just throws me out of the gate for that? No, I wouldn't care. I'd be like, okay, who gives a crap about banging your companions? Let's just move on with the story.
Well, it's not about banging companions. It's about making a
Yeah.
relationship. It's about
I
it's about a
understand,
story.
but it's not about making a sex relationship. I mean
It's
that's
about making a relationship. Like you're
right.
not even necessarily talking about sexual. It's just like in any
Make a
relationship.
right. But I mean, the way you were putting it out there was making a relationship. It was almost like making a relationship for an end goal, whereas mine is just making a relationship. Right? I can be in a relationship with Judy, and we could be friends, but we don't have to bump uglies at the end. Right? I'm only going towards that because I know I can,
All right.
not
All
because
right. So
I
hold on.
want to.
So the relationship you're in right now, you don't need Pootie Poo. You're just good with being buddies, watching
Well,
movies together.
Nick doesn't
Well,
immerse himself in games.
That's
that.
different, though. That's different, though. Shane.
No, it's a
That's,
goal.
That's real
Life is life. Life is life.
That's
it's not
real
a game.
Life
life.
is a
Yeah.
video game.
Yeah,
And
life is not
a
a
video
video
game.
No.
It is. It is. A video game is a
It
mimic of
is.
life. It's an
No.
extension of. It's an escape from life. No, seriously, people made video games called Second Life as an escape from life because they wanted things to do in video games that they couldn't do in real life.
Well, I
You
mean,
know.
there's some gamers that are like that, and that's fine. But I think I think actually you and Nick are just like quibbling over like the definition of a word. Basically, it if it wasn't for this particular, from what I'm hearing, and actually as we were discussing this, I'm kind of researching and cheating a little bit through Cyberpunk and reading and understanding some things. I can see where Judy's storyline can interact and play within what the story of the game is. And you're right, Patrick. I was put off by the amount of manual sexual devices in the beginning of the game, but that's really not. It's not the end all of end all. And actually, the advertisements, I actually like the advertisements. That's hilarious. I love that kind of thing. But it was just a lot of the dialogue, a lot of and then the multiple ways of satisfying yourself within the game. If like half of those or three quarters of those were gone, um, I don't think it affects the story. I think, yeah, if you take Judy out or if you take maybe another person out of the story, maybe it affects it a little bit in intrigue and stuff like that. But in the end, it's just the gratuity, the force feeding of it that I think for me sometimes will put me off on a game. And I know the whole thought. It's a dystopia. I get that, but it also sometimes feels a little force fed, like I was giving the example of the shows earlier. For me, and that's just my personality, and opinions are like, you know what, they all stink.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that it's force fed, but they've built it in to be part of the story, a part of the lore, a part of the game. I mean, if they would have took all the sexualized stuff out and replaced it with, anything else, and made that a part of the game, I wouldn't have noticed. I wouldn't have cared either, because that was the game they made. But this is the game they made, and what they've done is they've designed it to be a part of the game, a part of the story, a part of the lore. So if you took that out, just simply taking it out, yeah, you're removing the game, you're breaking part of it.
Well,
Which that
relationships
game
in
is
games,
broken enough.
relationships in games aren't new. I mean, I enjoy a lot of them too. What was it? MMO, Star Wars, Old Republic. You could romance your certain characters within that game. Mass Effect. I mean, those some of those lines are interesting. They're fun. They're basic. Yakuza. I mean, you build up your friendships with your teammates, and you get to do more powerful attacks. So there's a point in doing that in a sense. So
Well,
I'm not
Yakuza
necessarily.
has sex in it as well, but it fades to black.
Yeah, and it fades to black. But also, that wasn't one part that I went straight after. It was like I found out, oh, by the way, you get a super, you get a combo with that person if you get to a certain level, and so I'm bonding because of that. And that's how I looked at that stuff there. But when it comes to, I just my whole basis of that question was how much of the game would it really take away if they brought some of that out, if they pulled back just a little bit. But and each person has their own opinion, and that's fantastic. I mean, thank God we can sit here and debate that. That's awesome. But I just think that game there, I love dystopias. I get all that. I love the ads. I love all that. But the other stuff, I don't know if I need to be spoon fed it necessarily to enjoy a game.
No, I understand what you're saying. In your mind, it feels like it's something that's an unnecessary and unneeded thing, which I honestly could not disagree with you. But it's also the fact that the game is a central part of the game. It is a building block of the game. So it's I agree with you that it is definitely pushed out there, pushed upon, and just designed to be there for the sake of being there. But I think you can, I think you can have that game and not have the sex only if it was designed so.
Right,
Sure
and
that-
I agree. And I think a lot of games also, though, my point is, there's a lot of games that add these things in there for, like Russ said, just to be spoon fed in and just be put in there. And it's not necessarily games in general. It's a lot of media, right?
Yeah.
They put these particular things in there, sex scenes and those types of things, just for the, I don't know, necessarily shock value, but the spoon fed or just like, oh, well, this completes the relationship. You can have a lot of relationships in your life, and a lot of them don't have to be sex oriented, right? Cyberpunk, I understand with the future they have, but again, like I said, if that wasn't the future, let's say they had a clean slate and they didn't add any of that in there, and let's say you couldn't have sex within your companions, would you be depressed because of that? Would you be saddened because you couldn't bang Judy? I mean, really? I mean, if that's your fulfillment in the game, then you're missing the whole point of the game itself. It's
Well,
not
that's-
to.
But that's the point I'm making. It's part
It doesn't
of the game
mean you have
now.
to bang the person you're building a relationship with, right? I mean, and that's the end point you're trying to get at. Is like, oh, I'm trying to get there so I can bang them. That's the whole point. It's not to build this like, oh, now we have a strong bond. No, don't give me that crap. It's just to get there so you can bang that individual, and that's what you're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do in the game, right?
I don't agree with
if
that
that
at all.
was if that
I
wasn't
have
there,
to agree with Pat
Yeah,
there.
I don't agree with you at all, Nick, and you're twisting it.
no.
Yeah, you're
No.
twisting it. You are twisting
You could
it.
be friends with Judy and have a strong relationship, but you don't have to bump uglies in order to prove that relationship is the strongest of ever, right? So where you guys are inseparable. There are best friends in this life that we have. That those two individuals could be inseparable from one another, but they don't have to be banging in the bedroom at night.
But you're twisting it. You are
It wasn't
twisting it.
me.
How am I twisting it? I don't see how I'm
Because
twisting.
that's not the point that I made, but that's the point that you're twisting.
What's the point you made?
The point that I was saying was that you are trying to have a relationship with Judy. You want to get with Judy to have a relationship with Judy.
Yes, because you can. Not because you're not playing the game. The main protagonist of the game is not doing things for Judy just to have a sexual relationship with her.
No, she's not. But that's how you're making it sound.
The point I think Patrick is really trying to make is it's a completionist type of a thought. You want to complete the relationship with Judy. It's really not necessarily going in to go get banged, as we are so eloquently putting it. It's more of like for a gamer like Patrick, in a sense, number one, as he said before, it's immersion. So that's the first part of it. But the second part of it too, as we all know, Patrick is a completionist. So if he knows that there's steps A, B, and C, and D, and whatever, no pun intended there, towards the end of it, he's going to follow that path and get through there, along with the immersion portion of it. So it's not necessarily for us. For me, I can sit there and look at Patrick and I can say, for me, it's not an important part. That doesn't mean it's not an important part to him, because he wants to finish through that, and it's actually builds his story and his journey through that game. I think the components are there where you guys are disagreeing on something that is a game style versus a virtue or a morality thing.
I think you guys cracked me the hell up, because before we started this, I think some of us were like, we ain't really going to have that much to say. Yeah, right. But Russ, I think you're right with what you're saying. Pat's saying. And Nick, I think you are kind of twisting that around a bit of what he's trying to actually get at. But that's because I don't think you quite grasp what he's
because
really
Nick makes it
pushing
sound
for.
like I'm just out trying to bang the chick to bang her. That's not what I'm trying to do in the game. And, if it cuts to black, that's fine. I don't care about that. It's just that the whole thing is that I want Judy to be my companion. If the game, it's your romantic companion. The rest of the companion's cool. The problem with this game too is that I will say is that it doesn't let you choose. And what I mean by that is there's no choose of free will. If you're stuck, in one way or the other. And what I mean by that is in my opinion, I side and would like to get with Pan Am. I would like Pan Am to be the girl that my character meshes with. But you know what? The game has locked that out because Pan Am will not get with my character. And so, it's just like real life. It's, when you were younger, you had a crush on the whatever person at your school or whatever, but they were out of your league. In this case, Pan Am is out of my league, and she doesn't want to be with that. So it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, as me as a completionist, and as Russ said, completion, but also as me as an immersive player, I'm like, I want to run the story through the end. And the end of that story just happens to be, because you can decide that you don't want to be in a relationship with Judy and just say, I think this is a bad idea, and nothing happens. I will tell you that it changes the end of the game, depending on whether you end up by yourself or with somebody else. It changes the end of the game a little bit, and that's part of why I do it, because I'm like, it changes the story, because a video game for me is a choose your own adventure is what it is. I mean, when you read books, you cannot help but to imagine the world that's in the book because it's not visually represented for you. But in a video game, everything is visually represented and given to you. So my goal is not to bang Judy. It's to have a relationship with Judy, but that happens to be the way the game chooses to basically say that you have ended that storyline with Judy. You either decide to have a relationship with her, and as part of having that relationship with her, you guys have sex. You can decide, I don't want to have a relationship with you, and that's how it ends it.
You know what? Let's just all agree. Judy's a hoe.
She's pretty hard to get her to give it up, so.
Well, I mean, I think we all pretty much agree on the overall concepts of when sex and violence is appropriate or needed, which, a war game, it's needed. A game like Mass Effect, I can see how it's needed. Games like Cyberpunk, that's kind of on the cusp of needed or not. It all depends on how the game is designed overall. If the game is designed for relationships, bondings, and things like that, yeah, sex can be utilized in a respectful way, in a needed way. But
like I said, I'll agree with Nick that there's just too much. You don't need to show it. There's no point in showing it.
Right.
But that's probably just our age. But if we were younger, we'd say show it.
And I was going to make that point as well.
Get off my lawn.
We are at that age where we have children, we have relationships. We've been through the pervy stages in our lives, and we really don't need it again. We really don't want it again. Well, Russ is still going through his, but I don't know. I think overall though we all agree on the simple concepts of when it is and when it is not needed. Anybody else have anything to add to it?
I guess that calls it. So that horse is dead. It's brutalized.
I think, Russ, you destroyed some relationships with that question.
No, it was just a thought that as I'm listening, I mean, I know I get quiet sometimes in podcasts, but because I'm listening to you guys intently, maybe I should start listening to the podcast afterwards instead of during, but I listen to them, and I listen to what everybody says, and it's just very interesting how all of our perspectives are. Because we are kind of all at the same stages of our lives. I mean, I think for me, having no children in the house gives me a different perspective, and then you guys still having children in your house has a different perspective, because I definitely didn't raise my child in this age of technology. Yes, we had technology when Isabel was growing up, but not to the extent that it is here now, and the level of it where it is now. And so it's just an interesting perspective to listen to everybody discuss it. And then I just like to initiate thought with those questions. And it was just, I don't know, it was great. I appreciated the conversation. I hope everybody else did. And I hope our listeners did too.
Well, all I know is Russ, Pat, and Nick will never talk to each other again. Judy killed them.
Damn it, Judy.
Damn you, Judy, with your fine little booty.
She was mine first, and now Nick's going after her.
Judy's how?
Judy, man, she gets around.
She does. She
dirty
likes
girl.
those brain dances.
Well, I guess that kind of ends it for us. Thank you, Judy, and thank you everybody for coming and listening to our podcast. Have a great day.